Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. The Other Side lets you hear directly from the most connected players and observers across the spectrum of politics in Mississippi. From breaking news to political strategy to interviews with candidates and elected officials, we'll bring you facts, perspectives, and context that helps you cut through the noise and understand all sides of the story.
I'm Bobby Harrison. I'm here with my colleague and friend, Geoff Pender. Geoff, how you doing, man?
Hey, Bobby.
Geoff, we have with us today our state economist, Corey Miller. How you doing, sir?
Good to be with you.
Corey, I got to say he's a state economist, which is an important position, but he takes that very seriously. He's always been transparent and willing to answer questions. He's been the state economist for 4 years, and he's been with the State University Research Center, which the state economist heads up, I guess is a way to say it, for about a decade. So that means he must have started about it right to elementary school, Geoff.
Right.
That's right.
One thing, too,
Very young.
I will say he also helps us liberal arts majors figure out numbers.
Yeah,
a bit too.
He's very helpful with that. And so we just wanted to have you on. We appreciate you doing this to talk about sort of the state of the national economy and the state of Mississippi economy. We just kind of and maybe talk some about taxes and some other stuff. But let's start. Just how do things look right now?
I think things look pretty solid right now. We've had some upsets in the market because of economic data here lately, but I think there's a saying that the Fed acts and the market overreacts, and I think that's kind of what we've seen in the past couple of months. We have a labor market that is slowing down, but that was almost it had nowhere to go but down. It's been so tight since the end of the pandemic. Mississippi's labor market still seems to be a little bit tighter than the national labor market. In terms of economic growth, we just had a national real GDP number come out for the last quarter. That was 3%. That is, very solid growth. I think our latest forecast that we get from S&P Global, which is the forecasting group that drives our state forecast as well, they're talking about 2.5, 2.6% growth again this year. They thought, and we've talked about this for at least the last 2 years, we think growth is going to slow down the next year. We thought that coming into 24, and it hasn't really slowed down yet as much as we thought. But that's got to do with just the resilience of the economy. People have continued to spend despite, pretty high inflation still. So the outlook is for more growth, but just kind of moving from above trend to below trend, and trend being around 2.5% to 3%. So we're still expecting us to slow down next year. But
Bobby, you were remiss. I told you at the outset I want to tell my economist joke.
I thought you were going to end with that.
No. Anyway, I have an economist joke.
On a strong point, but
yeah, here it is.
Go ahead and start.
Okay. All right. There was an economist. He had his head in a boiling hot oven, and he had his feet in a bucket of ice. And he said, on average, I feel all right.
I've heard that one. I've heard a similar one.
Have you heard a similar? Okay.
About 3 economists who went hunting, and they were duck hunting, and the duck was in the air, and one shot to the left, and then one shot to the right, and the other ones missed it. But the third economist said, "We got it," because on average they were dead on.
Okay, all right. That one's equally as bad.
Well,
okay.
I'm not sure where to go from there.
Yeah. Right.
But getting back to the economy and jobs, what we keep on hearing about in Mississippi is, I think the Employment Security Commission put out a news release saying there's only 30,000 people in the workforce who didn't have jobs. There's some very low number. But what we keep on seeing, and we just can't seem to shake, is the number of people who just aren't looking for jobs. And we have it's no secret that we have the continuous lowest workforce participation rate. First of all, maybe explain what that is and and what that means for our economy, and why do we have such a low workforce participation rate?
Well, the labor force participation rate is the share of what is known as the civilian non-institutionalized population that is either working or looking for a job. Now, that population is everyone age 16 and older. There is no upper limit on it, who is working or looking for a job, who is not, in the military, not in prison or some other type of institution like that. And the labor force participation rate is, as I said, the share of the labor force that is, or share of that population that is either working or looking for a job. So if someone is unemployed or employed, they both count the same in that, because those two things together are what make up the labor force. So if somebody moves from unemployed to employed, it doesn't change the labor force participation rate if nothing else changes. What changes that is if people come into or out of that labor force. So if they're not looking for a job and they start looking for a job, then they get counted in that. So one of the reasons our unemployment rate has gotten so low is we've had a more than a 50% decrease in the number of people who are unemployed in the state since the beginning of the pandemic. But most of those people have not become employed. They've basically just left the labor force. So that's why both of those numbers have come down. Now, the reason the labor force participation rate in Mississippi is low, it's historically low. In data going back to 1976, which is far back as the Bureau of Labor Statistics has calculated that for each state, Mississippi has never been higher than about 43, I think.
43 out of 50 states.
And for the last few years, we were at 49th, just ahead of West Virginia. And for the past couple of years, we've had the lowest. What I've been trying to figure out, and Bob, you heard me talk about this last year at the Stennis Forum, why our rate was coming down at the time when the U.S. rate was going up. Basically, since the early part of 2022, our rate did not go up at all, while the U.S. rate was somewhat recovering. That was hard for me to figure out, and I'm still not sure what was going on there. The good news is, and I think Lieutenant Governor touched on this when he spoke with y'all last week, we have finally seen an increase in our labor force participation rate since April. It's up half a percentage point to 54.2%, which is still the lowest among all states. But that is, a positive sign. As far as trying to understand why our rate came down while the U.S. rate was going up, that's hard for me to figure out. If you look at some of the census numbers, we only have census data through 2022 for different age populations. Mississippi's population under, I think, 55 decreased for about the past 5 years, I think from 2017 through 2022. But our population above 55 and above increased. So that could explain why we saw a decrease in the rate. If we saw a population increase that doesn't typically have as much labor force participation, especially you get over 65, you don't expect to see much of that population in the labor force. But at the same time, you look at Louisiana, neighboring Louisiana, they had very similar population changes, but their labor force participation rate did not decrease. As a matter of fact, I think it increased a little bit. So that doesn't seem to be a complete explanation at all, maybe a partial explanation for why we've seen the decrease at best. Beyond that, it's just kind of speculation. I think for low-skill workers, I think inflation, when they've seen prices go up, and I think it may have an impact on their decision to enter the labor force, especially someone earning around minimum wage or or not much more than that. Again, that, like I say, that's just speculation on my part. Our labor force participation rate is historically low for two or three big reasons. One being educational attainment. Mississippi's educational attainment, both in terms of high school education and college education, is below the U.S. average. Our college attainment is about 10 percentage points below the U.S. average. I think we have about 20% of our population. It's closer to 30% for the U.S. average. So that has a lot to do with it. We also have very high disability rates in Mississippi relative to other states. That tends to keep people out of the labor force. Of course, not everyone with a disability is unemployed, but we know they have higher rates of unemployment compared to, or not engaged in the labor force compared to other groups. So there's other factors we could get into as well, but it's not something that's new in Mississippi. It's a problem we've had for a long time.
And this is, you said you could speculate on a lot of stuff, and this is speculation on my part. And you can shoot me down, but is the high disability rate affect? I mean, I always thought it was at least partially impacted by, negatively impacted by the fact that in this state, healthcare access is such a big issue, and if people don't get treatment for, diabetes is a perfect example. We have I think we have the highest percentage of people who because of diabetes lose
amputees,
leg amputated. And if you're working as a manual job and you have your leg amputated, I mean, it's going to be hard for you to work in, participate in the workforce.
Yeah, there's a lot of chronic conditions in Mississippi that are the result of, lack of healthcare access, or you're just not, knowledgeable about the importance of getting treatment for those conditions. So I think there is definitely a correlation between that and our disability rate and workforce participation.
One thing you kind of touched on, we kind of went through the looking glass with the pandemic on all kinds of fronts, including economic. I think the Fed, with interest rates and everything else, we just haven't seen normal economics at play here. I'm just wondering at this point, are we still in danger of a recession? Is that past us, or we've seen a soft landing, or is that still a possibility?
Well, I think the odds of recession remain pretty low, relatively speaking. I think most of them are putting it around 25%. And there's always a chance of a recession because of, some shock to the economy,
sure,
some geopolitical event, some natural disaster. But I would say the soft landing is definitely still in play. The soft landing being the phrase for being able to get inflation down without causing a big jump in unemployment. Now, nationally, we have seen an increase in the unemployment rate this year, but it's still, relatively low, historically speaking. I think the last number was about 4.3%. If that stays under 5%, then I think, within the next couple of years, I think most people would say that was a soft landing. And if inflation continues to come down and approach the Federal Reserve's target of about 2% a year, then that would definitely be a soft landing. Again, like I say, there's always a possibility of some shock to the economy. We do expect, as I mentioned earlier, we expect the labor force or the number of employed to slow down. Job growth has been very resilient, both nationally and I think to a lesser extent in Mississippi. Coming out of the pandemic, and particularly when interest rates started going up. There was thinking that we'd start seeing big drops in employment when interest rates started going up, but it's taken the better part of 2 years for us to really start to see a slowdown in employment. And we still have a relatively tight labor market here in Mississippi.
What do you have any numbers? Just some general comments. I mean, inflation is bad. I mean, every time I go to, and I don't go very often, but every time I go to the grocery store, I say, "Wow, this costs this much." But I mean, there has been healthy wage growth during this time also that kind of has offset that inflation at least to a certain extent. Am I wrong about that?
No, there has. We have seen wage
Does that
growth.
happen in Mississippi too?
Yes, and I think that's basically what it's done is allowed people to keep spending. It hasn't allowed wage growth hasn't allowed them to really get ahead, but it's allowed them to not fall as far behind as you might expect during the period of high inflation. Of course, inflation, as measured last month, I think fell under 3% year over year. But the only people that really care about that are economy nerds like me. But what most people are still complaining about, and justifiably so, is that prices are much higher than they were 4 or 5 years ago. And
that 3% is stacked
on top of about a total of 20%, I think, since about 2020. And that's just the average across everything. And, food, I think, is more like 25% increase in the last 4 years or so. So that's really what I think we've seen in terms of people's consumer sentiment. And those surveys talk about how people feel about the economy. That's driven a lot of it, I think, is the inflation, not just right now, but the inflation we've seen over the last 3 to 4 years.
And there were a lot of factors. I mean, that was kind of a worldwide phenomenon, wasn't it? The big increases after coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, there were supply chain issues, all over the world, and that's turned out, another aspect with COVID being a global economy. We saw how fragile some of those supply chains were, particularly, relying on one or two countries for supply of particular goods. When those supply chains were affected, we saw shortages here, which helped to drive up prices. And it was really, I think, a perfect storm with everything regarding the pandemic. We had so much of the economy shut down for a while, and then we opened back up. The government had provided assistance to people. People had money to spend. They wanted to get out and do things, but at the same time, we had these supply chain issues. So inflation, it seemed like, was almost inevitable in that environment.
One thing you mentioned government assistance. I just within recent days read a Pew report looking at state budgets and state economies in relation to all the federal spending that happened in response to the pandemic, after the pandemic. How did that affect Mississippi, that federal money, and what is the effect likely to be, assuming that rate of spending doesn't continue from the federal government?
Well, that assistance for the most part is pretty much faded. I think there's not much continuing to go through our economy that came out of COVID, but it had a really big impact on us for a couple of years. And I think part of the reason our revenues came in so much above our estimates for a couple of years was and it wasn't just in Mississippi, it was other states too, that revenues came in well above what projections were, because we had never seen that much money flow through the economy from the federal government at one time. And it allowed people to spend. And we also had the inflation going on, so that had an effect on our revenues as well. But it seems that with this past fiscal year that we're sort of getting back to normal. But then at the same time, we've got income tax cuts, working through the system. So that affects our revenues as well. But I think in terms of consumer spending, people seem to be able to continue to spend. I think they will, but just not at nearly at the rate we saw, coming out of COVID for a couple of years, and that lasted again, much longer than most anyone anticipated. Mississippi was not the only state that had big revenue surpluses during that time. Most states did.
That study I'm referring to, though, it also attempted to analyze, if I'm understanding it correctly, which may be questionable, it analyzed how much of that surplus or increased revenue by state was direct result of the federal spending and how much was trends that were already going on, states that were growing. And they mentioned Mississippi by name, one of few. I think
Mississippi was number 2
the,
in terms of
in terms of
impacted.
90% of what we saw was essentially directly from federal spending. And I mean, I guess included in that was maybe some warnings that maybe states like us, when this stops and the turnover from it stops, is our state budget likely to see some big crash, so to speak, from?
I don't think so. I think if we were going to see that, it would have already happened.
Would have by now.
I'm being hopeful there as well
Sure.
when I say
Sure.
that. But that doesn't surprise me that we were most impacted because we have so many low-income people, and that means I think probably on a per person basis, we got more assistance during that time than most other states. So that definitely had an impact on people's ability to spend money in the economy, which resulted in a lot more revenue.
Yeah, and in terms of revenue, and most people don't talk about this, but I know about it because I've heard you talk about it, is because we're so reliant on the sales tax that actually while the inflation was a bad thing for most everybody, for state revenues, it was a good thing because we were putting that 7% sales tax on more expensive items.
That's right. It did have a positive effect on our revenues.
And that brings me to there's so many questions I could ask you, but what is becoming is a big issue in the state, and I think it's going to be a big issue in the upcoming legislative session, is tax cuts. And there's kind of in a sense competing tax cuts out there now. Governor Reeves and Speaker White are talking about completely eliminating the income tax, which is in a rough terms, I would say now is about a little bit less than a third of the state general fund. And Lieutenant Governor Hosemann is talking about at least reducing the tax on food. That we have the highest statewide tax on groceries. We got that 7% tax on groceries, which a lot of people say it is a regressive tax. I mean, it's not. I mean, that's kind of just a factual thing.
Right. Sales tax, by definition, is a regressive tax because it takes a smaller amount of people's income as incomes go up, because a lower income person spends more of their income on food than a higher income person. They're by default going to spend more on sales tax.
And this is kind of hitting you. I mean, we didn't warn you what the questions were going to be up front. Do you have any stats or numbers or thoughts on? First of all, do you know? I have not seen a solid number on what the 7% tax on food actually generates in revenue. I don't know if that number is out there.
We have estimated that, and Department of Revenue has estimated that as well. It's an approximation at best. I looked at the numbers we had earlier this year, and again, those are backward-looking numbers, but I think that number has come up.
Sure, because
since
of inflation.
Inflation.
Yeah.
I think it's over $500 million at this point. I think a couple of years ago, when we were looking at it, it was probably closer to $400 million. But I think by now, and I haven't talked with anybody at Department of Revenue. I don't know what their latest number looks like. But yeah, I think we're talking in excess of $500 million at this point.
And this is an important fact that's kind of getting in the weeds, but that's $500 million combined, which including the 18.5% that goes to the municipalities. Is that right? Or that's not just a general fund. The $500 million wouldn't be just a general fund impact.
Well, no, I mean that's just
sales.
Just
total.
Yeah.
But whatever the lieutenant governor says, they do cut the sales tax on food. That they will make the cities whole, the municipalities whole, and
right. I think that's the big issue
Yeah.
with the sales tax. I think there's at least seems to be, to me, in my opinion, some kind of tacit agreement that cutting the grocery tax would be a good thing. The question is how do they offset that in terms of the municipalities and making them whole.
But would either one of those, or is it? This may be an unfair question to you. If it is, I apologize. But would the sales tax on food, cutting that versus income tax, would one of those have more of a positive impact on the state economy than the other, or is that just a hard question to answer?
Yeah, that is a little bit tough to know. You would expect both of those to have some positive effects on the economy, depending on what was done with the money. On the sales tax side, you would expect people to be able to spend more money on other things. On the income tax side, you would expect a similar effect, but you probably wouldn't. I don't know. It's hard to say. It is kind of hard to know without kind of digging into that.
But it is fair to say, it's just numbers that completely eliminating the income tax would take a lot more money out of the state general fund than cutting the tax on food.
Oh yeah, no question about that.
And the income tax cuts we've seen are being phased in, have been being phased in, and we're going to end up at what, 4%?
Yeah, I think in
Essentially.
2026 tax year we'll have a 4% flat rate on income, taxable incomes above $10,000.
From what's already been enacted or gone into effect on the phase in of the cuts, have you been able to see any effect that could be directly attributed
In terms of the economy?
in terms of the economy or jobs or anything that could be
Haven't
attributed
seen
to
anything
that?
we've been able to isolate and saying, oh, that was caused by this tax cut. Not at this point, no. And we've seen it show up in revenue, obviously, but that's a little bit clearer relationship there.
Is a slowdown in income in that category, the personal income tax revenue stream? It seems like it may be a bigger slowdown or reduction than what was projected. Is that fair, or is it too soon to say?
I think it's a little too soon to say.
We do have 1 year of, well, I guess we don't have a year because
right, because it's done by a calendar year,
Right.
and the revenues aren't fiscal year, so it's not a one-to-one match. We did the first year we saw the elimination of the 4% bracket, which was on the second $5,000 of taxable income. We didn't really notice much then, but I think when we start getting closer to that 4% final rate, we'll start to notice it more.
And of course, you may not want to comment on this, but I did a story years ago based on 2-year studies that created quite a stir, in that I just took and compared the two studies, And I say your studies, I guess it was university. I don't know. I mean, you were part of it, but I guess other people worked on it too. But actually, Medicaid expansion, based on those studies, just looking at the raw numbers, would have a bigger impact on the state economy than produce more jobs, generate more revenue, even grow the population. Medicaid expansion would do that more so than eliminating the income tax.
We've talked about that before, you and I, and the biggest difference between the two is you end up bringing in so much more outside money that's not in the economy yet, in terms of the federal government. Whereas the income tax cuts, yeah, you're letting people keep more of their money, but that's money that's already in our economy. It was just being spent by the state and being spent instead of being spent by individuals. So you just don't get as big of a shift there in terms of the economy because you don't have as much coming in from outside that wasn't here already.
And we saw during the pandemic what that federal money can do to the
Exactly.
Yeah. One other thing we have a presidential election, and we have two. I think both candidates have made proposals that economists probably talk about a lot. Former President Trump has talked about some pretty far-reaching tariffs that the Vice President Harris's campaign is saying that's equivalent to a tax on the middle class, whereas Vice President Harris is proposing. She says it's not. She says she hadn't proposed price controls, but sort of some
gouging,
and I think at least some economists say both those things could have negative impacts on the economy.
Yeah, I was reading an article a week or so ago that was saying this is not the good election for economists because of those things happening on both sides that nobody is really listening to the economists.
But I guess you're using Geoff and your joke that's kind of in the middle. That'd be okay.
Well, I think in both cases they haven't been clear or maybe firm on exactly what these policies are going to look like.
Imagine that.
Imagine
in
that.
an election year. Yeah.
I guess since you're here, if you could take out your crystal ball and you have any stock tips or no, but
I definitely don't have that. My wife is a financial advisor. She would be much better equipped to give you financial tips than I would.
It's always good to hear that there's not a definite impending recession, despite what we've been through. Do you have any overall short-term, long-term predictions as far as what our economy in the state's gonna see?
That reminded me of another economist joke that economists have predicted something like 9 of the last 7 recessions, which means it's very difficult to predict the timing of a recession. But again, the major forecast firms don't seem to think we've got a recession on the horizon, barring something unforeseen. It does seem that our labor markets at both state and national are expected to slow down over the next couple of years, probably relatively flat. Employment growth is expected both nationally and at the state level. In terms of just overall growth in the economy, we're expecting that to slow as well.
Is that 2-ish% you mentioned before likely applicable to the state, or will we be?
Right now, our models are actually looking a little better than we've seen in the past couple of years. The models are saying we're going to hit at least 1% growth this year, which would be
for the state.
Which
would still be below the national average.
Right, national average, but that would be above what we've seen really since the end of the Great Recession, outside of that 2021 coming out of the pandemic year. So that's a positive forecast. We'll have to see how that plays out. But again, like I say, overall, we see things kind of steady as she goes.
Which that's good with economics, right?
Yes, it is.
No roller coaster,
Right.
Okay, well, Corey Miller, is there anything we hadn't asked you that we should have?
I can't imagine there's anything else you should have asked me.
Well, we appreciate your time.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
As we cover the biggest political stories in the state, you don't want to miss an episode of The Other Side. We'll bring you more reporting from every corner of the state, sharing the voices of Mississippians and how they are impacted by the news. So what do we need from you, the listener? We need your feedback and support. If you listen to the podcast on a player like iTunes or Stitcher, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That address is podcast@MississippiToday.org. Y'all can also reach out to me or any of my colleagues through social media or email. And as always, thank you for your feedback and support. Subscribe to our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast app or stream episodes online at MississippiToday.org/theotherside. For the Mississippi Today team, I'm Adam Ganeshow. The Other Side is produced by Mississippi Today and engineered by Blue Sky Studios. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.